Hello, friends. I'm so glad that you're with me again today. In this chapter, one of the questions that you're going to be asked is about something called encyclopedias. Have you ever heard of an encyclopedia? Well, when I was a little girl, I certainly had. And when I grew up, I had too, because an encyclopedia is where you would go to find information about different subjects. And somebody might have encyclopedias in their home that would teach their families about a variety of different subjects. Like you could look up, for example, the country of Mexico, and it would give you information about the country of Mexico. And then you could look up German shepherds, and there would be a passage that would teach you about what a German shepherd was. It was kind of like a dictionary, but it would have longer passages, longer explanations that could answer questions about the world. Now we have the internet to answer well, maybe not all of our questions, but so many of our questions. And so we don't really use encyclopedias anymore. But this book was written in the 1960s before the internet, and that was a common way for people in their houses to find out information about different subjects they were interested in. And you would get a huge set of encyclopedias. They would my grandmother had a whole cabinet devoted to her encyclopedia set. And the cabinet would come with the encyclopedia set, and you would put all your books, which were all hardbound books, in the cabinet, and it was a fun place to go and look for information. Anyway, you'll hear about it in the section of Flat Stanley we read today. Again, before I read, I always do like to look at the questions so I can listen for the answers while I'm reading. So, today we're reading chapter 3. Number 1, why would the author make Arthur, that is Flat Stanley's brother, right, mad about having to walk? Number 2, why was Arthur piling volumes of the encyclopedia on himself? Encyclopedias were very thick books. I have a feeling you might know the answer to both of those questions without me even needing to read, because you already know about Arthur, and perhaps you have an idea of some of the feelings he might be having when his brother is getting all this extra attention. Number 3, what did Stanley do to try to help Arthur feel better about himself? Number 4, what eventually happens to Stanley? Number 5, how does Stanley feel about Arthur at the end of the chapter? And number 6, who is right, Arthur or Stanley? What evidence do you have to support your opinion? So I'm not sure what that's talking about because I did not read this entire chapter yet. Let's find out what that last question, number 6, who is right, Arthur and Stanley, is about. Let's go ahead and read. I like this chapter. I read part of it, but not the whole thing. Chapter 3, Stanley and the Kite. No, not Stanley and the Kite. Stanley the Kite. Do you have a feeling you know what's going to happen in this chapter after reading that title? I bet you do. Mr. Lambchop had always liked to take the boys out with him on Sunday afternoons to a museum or roller skating in the park, but it was difficult when they were crossing streets or moving about in crowds. Stanley and Arthur would often be jostled from his side, and Mr. Lambchop worried about speeding taxis that hurrying people might accidentally knock them down. It was easier after Stanley got flat. Mr. Lambchop discovered that he could roll Stanley up without hurting him at all. He would tie a piece of string around Stanley to keep him from unrolling, and he'd make a little loop in the string for himself. It was as simple as carrying a parcel. A parcel is synonymous. It's a synonym for a package. And he could hold on to Arthur with the other hand. Stanley did not mind being carried because he had never much liked to walk. Arthur didn't like to walk either, but he had to. It made him mad. Here's Arthur and Stanley. That does look like a convenient way to go around town, doesn't it? Be a fun way to go to Disneyland, I'll tell you that. One Sunday afternoon in the street, they met Ralph Jones, an old college friend of Mr. Lambchop's. "Well, George, I see you have bought some wallpaper," Mr. Jones said. "Going to decorate your house, I suppose." What is the wallpaper? You're right, the wallpaper is Stanley. Wallpaper, said Mr. Lambchop. Oh no, this is my son Stanley. He undid the string and Stanley unrolled. How do you do? Stanley said. Nice to meet you, young fellow, the man said. George, he said to Mr. Lambchop, that boy is flat. Smart, too, Mr. Lambchop said. Stanley is third from top of his class at school. Phooey, said Arthur. This is my younger son, Arthur, Mr. Lambchop said. There he is meeting his dad's friend. And he will apologize for his rudeness. I kind of feel bad for Arthur. I mean, it would be very difficult if your brother were kind of a celebrity and you were not. It would be hard. Arthur could only blush and apologize. Mr. Lambchop rolled Stanley up again and they set out for home. It rained quite hard when they were on the way, and Stanley, of course, hardly got wet at all, just around the edges. But Arthur got soaked. Late that night, Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop heard a noise in the living room. They found Arthur lying on the floor near the bookcase. He had piled a great many volumes of Encyclopedia Britannica on top of himself. Can you visualize that? All those books stacked on top of him. And if you'd ever seen an encyclopedia, you would know those are very big books. Put some more on me, Arthur said. I think he's fed up. Do you have a feeling you know which way this chapter is going, knowing that Arthur is so fed up? He said that when he saw them. Don't just stand there, help me. Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop sent him back to bed, but the next morning they spoke to Stanley. Arthur can't help being jealous, they said. Be nice to him. You're his big brother, after all. There's Arthur trying to get flattened. Didn't work. The next Sunday, Stanley and Arthur went to the park by themselves. The day was sunny, but windy too, and many older boys were flying beautiful, enormous kites with long tails made of all the colors in the rainbow. Arthur sighed. Someday, he said, I will have a big kite and I will win a kite flying contest and be famous like everyone else. Nobody knows who I am these days. Stanley remembered what his parents had said. He went to a boy whose kite was broken and borrowed a large spool of string. You can fly me, Arthur, he said. Come on. He attached the string to himself and gave Arthur the spool to hold. He ran lightly across the grass sideways to get up speed, and then he turned to meet the breeze. Up, up, up went Stanley, being a kite. He knew just how to manage on the gusts of wind. He faced full into the wind if he wanted to rise, and let it take him from behind when he wanted speed. He had only to turn his thin edge to the wind carefully a little at a time so that it did not hold him. Doesn't that look like fun? I'm afraid of heights, so I don't know. Maybe I wouldn't like it, but it kind of does look like fun. And then he would slip gracefully down toward the earth again. Arthur let out all the string, and Stanley soared high above the trees, a beautiful sight in his red shirt and blue trousers against the pale blue sky. Everyone in the park stood still to watch. Stanley swooped right and then left in long matched swoops. He held his arms at his side and zoomed at the ground like a rocket and curved up again toward the sun. He side-slipped and circled, made figure eights and crosses and a star. Nobody has ever flown the way Stanley Lambchop flew that day, and probably no one ever will again. After a while, of course, people grew tired of watching, and Arthur got tired of running about with him on an empty spool. Stanley went right on, though, showing off. 3 boys came up to Arthur and invited him to join them for a hot dog and some soda pop. Arthur left the spool wedged in the fork of a tree. He did not notice while he was eating the hot dog that the wind was blowing the string. There he is, eating his hot dog and ignoring his brother. And it tangled about a tree. The string got shorter and shorter, but Stanley did not realize how low he was until leaves brushed his feet, and then it was too late. He got stuck in the branches. There he is. Don't you think that squirrel is wondering what is going on here? 15 minutes passed before Arthur and the other boys heard his cries and climbed up to set him free. Stanley would not speak to his brother that evening, and at bedtime, even though Arthur had apologized, he was still cross. Alone with Mr. Lambchop in the living room, Mrs. Lambchop sighed and shook her head. You're at the office all day having fun, she said. You don't realize what I go through with the boys. They're very difficult. Kids are like that, Mr. Lambchop said. Phases. Be patient, dear. I don't know. These are some pretty unusual circumstances. I can understand why the boys might be having these sorts of issues. So I'm thinking with number 6, who is right, Arthur or Stanley? I feel like that question is um, a little bit open. Like, who is right to feel jealous, Arthur or Stanley? Who is right to feel angry, Arthur or Stanley? So you could respond, Arthur, and you could say, Arthur has the right to be jealous because he's not flat and his brother's getting all the attention. Or you might say, Stanley. Then you could say, what evidence do you have to support your opinion? Stanley um, might be upset because it wasn't kind of Arthur to leave him up in the tree. So you decide which opinion you think is right. And I look forward to hearing what you chose. Bye.